Cecile Croomy is a rank 3 Annihilator pilot. Her first effect is a Nightmare Frame skill gauge boost 3 seconds after deployment, and every 30 seconds thereafter, this unit's Nightmare Frame skill gauge is increased by 87.5%. If you use her new Nightmare Frame, the Sutherland Air Cavalry, it'll become 100%. And her other ability is a fast redeployment time or rapid relocation. She reduces this unit's redeploy time by 30%, and the redeploy time of all ally units is reduced by 20%. Now, her redeploy time is normal, so it's not a huge reduction, but still very appreciative. And since we're there, let's talk about her stats real quick. Her health is fine, her defense could be better, and the long range attack is okay. I wish it was a little higher, but I guess given her other abilities, you can't complain too much. So let's talk about her abilities and this character as a whole. This Cecile is really good because, as I said, she is an Annihilator with a fast redeployment time, which does come in handy, especially if you combine her with her Nightmare Frame, the Sutherland Air, and she basically becomes a bomb because on deployment her skill gauge will go to 100%, and the Sutherland Air will deal 9,999 damage. I'm still not sure why it's that instead of 10k, but that's just how they designed her. Of all of her abilities, the gauge boost is probably her best one, because even now on the Japanese side, I see a lot of pro players using her in the harder missions because that gauge boost works really well with all Nightmare Frames that have to passively charge, which includes the Shinkiro, the Gawain, the Gawain flight enabled version, the Percival's range weapon, and so forth. So Cecile makes it easier to use those Nightmare Frames. And just like the other Ceciles, she reduces the redeployment time of all your other pilots waiting to be redeployed, and as I said in my other video, this does stack with the other Ceciles, so theoretically if you used all three, you would get a higher reduction on the redeployment time. Eventually you do reach a max, but like I said, you can use all three to get a higher redeployment time. When it comes to the cons of this Cecile, let's start with that artwork. It's okay. I wish the angle was better, but I know what they were going for because they were trying to reference that scene from the anime, so I get it, but I'm not a huge fan of it. I think C2's art for this banner is a lot better, even though it's very sus. The next problem with this Cecile is the fact that her defense is not that great, and so she has pretty terrible durability. Even after the first year boost, it's still not that great because it only increased her health and nothing else. And another stat that could have been increased was her attack power. Right now, 700 long range attack is okay, but obviously down the road it will not be. So I'm disappointed that it didn't get a boost in the first year anniversary. I'm hoping that might change in the second year anniversary, but I won't hold my breath. My assumption is that this was done to balance the fact that she is a rank 3 pilot that has a really good Nightmare Frame skill gauge boost effect. Because with the rank 4 Cecile, B-Day Cecile, she has overall better stats and abilities, but because she's a rank 4 limited character, I guess that makes sense why she would have that, and this rank 3 Cecile does not. But as a rank 3 pilot, this is one of the better ones in the game. You will use her a lot in difficult missions, possibly arena mode, and of course later on when they limit the pilots you can use by rank, which is a challenge for the Akito missions. That's not for a while now, but just again something to keep in mind. Definitely one of the better pilots that we've gotten in a long time, and of course I say this with absolutely no bias at all. Now let's talk about her Nightmare Frame, the Sutherland Air. Okay, here is the Sutherland Air. It has a float unit, defense is 180, cost is 7, the long range attack power, it only has a long range weapon, and it's 230. It only attacks one enemy at a time. The special attacks a single enemy in range. Really? Attach a single in range enemy target? Why are they worded so weirdly? Anyways, it does that with 3.25 times your attack power, and if you're using Cecile, it becomes level 5 and it deals 9,999 damage with no commas. That's how you know how serious this is. Now at first glance, this Nightmare Frame does seem a bit underwhelming. The attack power, it's okay, but not the best for a long range Nightmare Frame, and it only attacks one enemy at a time for both the special and the base attack. At least the skill does more damage than the normal Sutherland with a range weapon. But there's one key thing that you're all missing. This is the best budget nightmare frame with a long range weapon and a float unit that you can get multiples of. Because technically the best budget nightmare frame with a long range weapon is the Lancelot flight enabled version with the Sutherland arm, but you can only get one in the game and technically two later on, but that's not for a while now. Now some might argue that the Polomedes is better, but I don't think so, because while the Polomedes does have higher attack power and deals more damage on special and attacks 2 enemies at a time, it also has a higher cost and terrible base range, whereas this Sutherland does not. So you can cover more ground with this Sutherland, and of course it's really good for situations where you can't use ground units. Later on in the game, there will be maps that have absolutely no spots for ground units, so you'll have to use many of these nightmare frames when constructing a team for those missions. And of course, if you use it with Cecile, it does fix damage, which, as I said in my Cecile discussion, that makes her a pseudo bomb, because you could deploy Cecile, her skill gauge goes to 100%, and you deal basically 10k damage plus the actual multiplier, which takes into account Cecile's attack power. So a lot of really good uses there, but I think for most people, the best part is the fact that this is a float unit nightmare frame that's easy to acquire, giving you another tool you can use if you don't have the Mordred, the Gawain, and so forth. And that's what I like about this nightmare frame. I do recognize the fact that there will be better float unit nightmare frames that are easy to acquire, basically budget options, but for right now in the game, which is what matters for this video, this nightmare frame is really solid. Now let's talk about the new C2. Probably the real reason why you're summoning from this banner. C2 is a guardian or defensive pilot. She's got 7,000 health, over 900 defense, blocks 3, costs 8. Okay, I know we don't go over those stats, but I did right there. Anyways, let's go to her abilities. I'm your ally. Well, I mean, sort of. The max health and defense for this unit is increased by 10% for 55 seconds every 10th time it takes damage. I guess it'd be if she takes damage, but that's fine. I'm being very nitpicky. Then she has a recover health high. She heals 27.5% of this unit's health after a set amount of damage is dealt, received, or healed. Now, like I said before, her stats, they're really good. High defense, high health, and even her melee for the short range. Actually, that's dumb. Melee is short range. Anyways, that attack power is 300, which is the same as the Colin that came with Lazy Witch C2. So that's pretty good. Is it better than Defensive Colin, the first one we got for attack power? No, but still, 300 is really solid. The thing about this C2 is that she has 2 means to heal herself, making her basically the ultimate shield. And when combined with the Gawain that consumes 3,000 health to activate, you can spam the Gawain with C2. And that's why the two of them go really well together. And because of this deadly combination, you can use her in arena mode to get through all the melee enemies to help your ranged ones get in there and take out the tower, or just use C2 to do it herself. Unlike the rank 3 Cecile Croomy, they actually gave this C2 a really good first year boost, especially with her health and defense, as they increased both of them. Not that they were ever low to begin with, but they're even higher now, making her even better post the first year anniversary. What I really love about this C2 is the fact that she is just simply a really powerful wall that heals herself through 2 different means, and you can spam her with the Gawain, which makes her also good against bosses, the ones that force you into the cutscene, not a cutscene, but the boss battle mode, I suppose, where you can only fight the boss and nothing else. She's very good in hard mode, obviously extra, and now that we have her in the game, she officially power creeps 0 C2, which we got very early on in the game as the better tank. Although that C2 is still very good, especially now that the Gawain has come out, but this C2 has now overtaken that one for the best C2 tank in the game, and arguably maybe the best tank in the game period now, but I still think the original Colin is really good. Now when it comes to the cons of this C2, there really aren't many except for one word, yeah, I guess it's one word, and you guys already know what it is: power creep. The problem with this C2 is they just make better ones. There's a banner coming up in R2 where we get Lelouch and C2, and that C2 is basically this one with more attack power, similar effects, similar similar health and defense, it's just better. There's another one that comes out during the Code Black event, again better stats than the C2 and better effects. And even besides C2, you have pilots like Angry Suzaku that comes out that is better at utilizing the Gawain than she is, and that's a problem because the best use of the C2 is spamming the Gawain, and if there are better pilots that do that, obviously that means this C2 isn't the best anymore, or not as usable. And that's the only reason why I don't use her on either my Japanese accounts, is because I just have better options available to me. Otherwise, I would. Although in certain situations, I will still use her, but most of the time I just don't, because they just made so many better pilots, which is a damn shame because I really like this C2 a lot when considering her stats and abilities. Now let's talk about the Gawain's melee weapon, and I guess let's revisit the Gawain's range weapon. Okay, so here is the Gawain's melee weapon, and by the way, I get this question all the time, so let me just answer this right now. If you see a Nightmare frame that has the same name as another one, like the Sutherland or the Gawain in this case, and you are wondering what's the difference between this one and the range one you got with Lelouch on that banner many months ago, where he came with the Defense of Suzaku, well, the answer is there isn't any. Aside from the fact that if you get this Gawain, the melee weapon will be unlocked, and you have to unlock the range weapon, versus the other banner where the Gawain's range weapon was unlocked by default, and now you have to unlock the melee weapon. Either way, you have access to both weapons regardless of how you got the Gawain. So just keep that in mind. This works the same way when it comes to the Sutherland that came with the Narita Jeremiah versus the one that came with the rank 3 Jeremiah. So regardless of which one you got, you can still have access to both weapons. Eventually in the game, they do add a system where you have to get a certain Nightmare frame to upgrade another one, but thankfully that's limited and only used, I think, for 3 Nightmare frames. So it's not a huge deal, but in those cases, it is quite annoying. Now let's actually get to the melee weapon itself. So it's got 280 defense. The cost is pretty good at 11. Extra block never hurts. 250 base attack power. Hits 2 enemies at one time. It's got a lance plus 2 to side. Really good range there. And the special is all over the place. Like, it's just crazy, but it's pretty cool. Can be activated by consuming 3000 HP. Attacks 3 enemies within range at 6.5 times your attack power, and inflicts 8k on top of that. The health of this unit is lowered by 5% for 90 seconds. And before I continue talking about this, let's go to the range weapon. They changed one thing. It's now got 300 attack power. So if you fully upgrade the range and the melee, you'll get that 300 attack. In case you're wondering, how do I achieve this? That's how you do it. It's no different than the Lancelot and the Lancelot flight enabled version. Now let's go back to the melee weapon. So one thing I really like about this thing is that it's got really high defense, high attack power, and a lance. Now when it comes to the skill of this Nightmare frame, there's a big problem with it. It has to consume 3000 health. Now for most pilots in the game, that means you can't use it with them. Now obviously if you don't care about the skill and you just want a really solid lance, especially for healers, then it doesn't really matter. But if you want to use a skill, you have to have a pilot with a sufficient amount of health, and currently in the game there aren't too many. Regardless if you want to use one with high range attack or high melee attack, because of the fixed damage, doesn't really matter which one. Although I'd recommend something like Cornelia because she has high melee attack power and high health, or of course the new C2. But regardless of which pilot you choose, you have to keep this in mind. Another problem with this Nightmare frame is the fact that it lowers the max health by 9%, I believe. Is it 9%? Actually, it's not 9. It's 5%. Sorry, 5%. And that means that eventually there'll come a point where you can't keep spamming this skill if you're using something that's not C2 who can increase her max health. So besides her, the rest of the pilots in the game can't keep spamming it. There will come a point where it just won't work anymore. A good way to circumvent this, I guess, is to pair the pilot you want to use with a healer. That way you can keep spamming the Night from skill gauge and not have your pilot killed off by the fact that you're consuming 3000 health. And that's another thing I should mention. While it's really cool, you can deal a lot of damage, you are consuming a lot of health to do it, and if you're not careful, you could actually kill your own pilots by doing this, which does happen more often than you would think. So like I said, it's good to have the pilot paired up with a healer if you want to do this crazy kamikaze attack to kill all the enemy Nightmare frames. Now the interesting thing about this Nightmare frame is that you're probably wondering why it's the highest tier on App Media's tier list, and that's because it's the most exploitable formidable one in the game because there are so many pilots that come out after this banner. The most infamous is Angry Suzaku, who can break this nightmare frame by dealing tons of damage, self-healing, and inflicting damage on top of that, especially when you combine him with the new Yuffie. That's basically the holy trinity in this game. It's Angry Suzaku, melee weapon Gawain, and strategy type Yuffie, because that combination is very deadly, and even now is still deadly, so it's one of the best in the game. Point is, there's a lot of exploits like that where you can actually abuse the Gawain's melee weapon. For most pilots, like I said, this is not the case, but for the rare exceptions, yes, you can do some crazy stuff with the Gawain. Now, obviously, if you summon the Gawain, the melee weapon one, you will have C2, so you'll have some way to exploit it, but of course, that's nothing compared to Angry Suzaku and pilots like that we're going to get down the road. Now, if you're wondering if you should summon from this banner, I would say absolutely go for it, because this C2 is really powerful, and this nightmare frame is something you're going to be using for a very long time. It's a really good investment, especially if you're planning on going for Angry Suzaku, which again, I recommend everyone do that because those two are a match made in heaven, which is a fun clip I used to use in my older videos. Also, this banner has Cecile and of course C2, the two C2, so obviously that's another reason to summon from this banner. But either way, I'll leave it up to you, but this is definitely one of the better banners in the game, period. And consider we're not getting too much after this that's worth your time, I think it's worth going a little extra on this. Now, if you're looking for a guide on the recent expedition levels we just got called the Grand Battle, especially on hard mode, maybe one day I'll do extra, but for now, this is on hard mode, then check out this video right here.